right here on the south side of Flagstaff. We hope you'll help decide what the future of this area should be. As part of this orientation, I'm going to use Google Earth to do a bit of a flyover, different parts of the study area for a quick look at different parts. And we'll look from above and we'll look on the ground. Starting off with Anderson Mesa. Well, this is where my pointer comes in. Anderson Mesa is this big lobe here. Only the northernmost part of Anderson Mesa is included as part of the study area. This blue line, of course, is the boundary of the study area. So such landmarks as Marshall Lake are not within the study area boundaries. So Marshall Lake is not in the study area, but it is one of my favorite places to go and photograph, and I love the views there. So from the place right here, where Susan and I are walking, it's just about a half mile going either north, west, or east to a spot that brings you to the study area boundary. This part of Anderson Mesa is the highest part of any place in the study area, and it's higher, it's 7,200 feet, so it's higher than Flagstaff itself. Here you can start off on the Arizona Trail and walk 14 miles through the study area. And along the way, you cross only a couple of little-used Forest Service dirt roads. So I'm afraid we're going to be seeing a bit of this map, but I like maps, and hope some of you here appreciate being oriented with one. Anyway, the next area I'm going to mention is called Campbell Mesa, and it's this area at the northern end of the study area. And it's just east of the Continental neighborhood. Perhaps this is the area with the greatest network of trails and perhaps the greatest number of recreationists use it. It's got a series of loop trails on Campbell Mesa. There's the Arizona Trail and the new Flagstaff Loop Trail. Either does or will go through this area. It is a designated non-motorized use area. So the trail systems are used by walkers, bikers, joggers, and horseback riders. Now we're going to look at an area that's called Cherry Canyon, and it's watershed. And that's this southeastern part of the study area. This whole basin here, water flows down into this canyon, which is Cherry Canyon. So from Google Earth, looking down, we can see the big watershed coming off of Anderson Mesa, and it flows down, and as it gets down close to the greater Walnut Canyon here, it becomes quite deep. And here, as it crosses in, it meets up with Walnut Canyon. Right about there is where it encounters the existing boundary of the National Monument. So I wondered where Cherry Canyon got its name until I went down there, I guess a year ago in September with some friends, and sure enough, there were cherries growing down in the bottom of it. So maybe it was named for a guy named Seymour Cherry, but I have a feeling, no, it's probably the cherries. Anyway, it's a limestone canyon. One thing I thought was unique about it was I think it's the largest diameter ponderosis I've seen anywhere around, Flagstaff area, I mean. There's some wonderful big old trees down there that I think the canyon was just too rugged, and anyway, the logging never occurred down in the rugged floor of Cherry Canyon. Then we're going to go to an area that I'll call Upper Walnut Canyon, which is in Sandy Canyon, and it's this area here. Walnut Canyon really begins with a dam of lower lake areas, and the water comes out, and immediately there's a canyon which flows off this way. And there's a little side canyon here, it's called Sandy's Canyon. And there's a campground right here, Canyon Vista. So those may be places that you are familiar with. Well, here we are on Google Earth, Lake Mary Road, and then the campground here, and this is Sandy's Canyon. There is a trail going from the campground down Sandy's Canyon to the floor of Walnut Canyon, and then on to the Arizona Trail and in other places. And this part of Walnut Canyon is unusual in that it does seem to have almost always water, big pools of water, even flowing water, which is unusual. I think the only part of Walnut Canyon that's like that. Right by the Canyon Vista Campground, there's a very popular climbing area, which would be the cliffs on the upper right of this picture, called the Pit, I think, by climbers. But right below you in the foreground, when you stand there looking across, you see this tremendous jumble of basalt boulders. And at this area, at the junction of Walnut Canyon and Sandy's Canyon, it is actually within the city limits of Flagstaff. So at this spot, that might be the home of the tallest ponderosa pine tree in town. One of these was measured at 126 feet tall, which is pretty tall for a local ponderosa. And back to the map. One more, well, I guess there's one more after this, but and this, the next area I'm going to point a few pictures of is an area I call the Western Anderson Mesa Canyons, which are here. There's a number of canyons that flow north, cut into the limestone here. And this is an area that I think is probably the remotest, least visited part of the study area, least visited by people anyway. There are a half dozen or so unnamed canyons that are eroded deeply into the limestone and sandstone here. Also in this part of Anderson Mesa, it's an area once covered with a network of logging railroads, but there are a few stands of old-growth ponderosas that somehow were overlooked or for whatever reason were not cut down during the logging years. And then we get over to the western part of the study area, and I guess I'll call it just part of Walnut Canyon from Fisher Point down to the Monument Valley. I'll call that the western Walnut Canyon. And then these tributary canyons, Fay and Skunk Canyon. And these canyons are where Susan's going to be talking a lot about, so I won't say anything about that, but just a few pictures of it. This is Fisher Point, where if you're heading down canyon, this is where the canyon really narrows down. And then for the next over 3 miles, the canyon twists and turns in a very narrow canyon before reaching the boundaries of the monument, where the same narrow twisting canyon continues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about geology. That's my part of the natural history talk, and then we'll be turning it over to Susan. My understanding of the geology here is based entirely on talking to several friends who've helped me out, particularly Dr. Richard Holmes, who sat down and explained things to Susan and I, and our friend Wayne Rennie, who is here tonight and is very helpful as well. So I'm just going to look at a couple of the basic rock types you would see. The youngest and most recent rocks in the study area are basalts. They're about 860,000 years old, and these are the ones you can see in the Canyon Vista area. There's exposures of the Moenkopi Formation, which is comprised of soft reddish-brown mudstone and siltstone. But it's not outcropped in any dramatic way, so there's no dramatic pictures of the Moenkopi here. In fact, it only remains, because it's so easily eroded, it only remains where it's overlain by a protective cap of basalt that makes up the top of Anderson Mesa. The Kaibab limestone is the predominant rock in the study area. It's the same rock you stand on when you visit either rim of the Grand Canyon. The Coconino sandstone is under the Kaibab limestone. It is exposed only where Walnut Creek has eroded down through it to through the Kaibab